shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you to Thursday's edition of End of the Age. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. And today I've got a pretty unique topic for you. It's something that actually happened over the last couple weeks. And very interesting. A lot of you have heard this in the news. The title of my program today, I wanted to give you a title to let you know exactly what I'm talking about. The title is Fake News, Propaganda, and the Truth. There's a big difference. So let's talk about it. By now, I'm sure most of you have heard the exchange between Donald Trump and the CNN reporter in which President-elect Trump stated, "You are fake news, your entity." He was talking to the CNN guy. Well, Trump was referring to the fact that CNN, and in the conversation he was having along with others, have been spreading propaganda in an effort to push their agenda. Not necessarily true news, but propaganda. Is the truth important to them? Well, not always, but their agenda is very important. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. The truth versus a lie. Propaganda versus the truth. Well, most of you will agree that if you follow the news at all, you have to be very, very careful which site or source you go to for information. Some are very, very credible. You can trust every word on there, and they will report in a fair and balanced way, only providing you with the absolute truth. Others really could care less necessarily about the truth, but they want to push their agenda. Now, they'll give you the truth, but some of them kind of twist it just a little bit to make sure you get their version of it. They're pushing an agenda. It's called propaganda. So are you getting really the feeling of something that happened years ago, kind of deja vu? Well, let me tell you what I'm talking about. Let me set the stage to give you really a brief overview of what I'm talking about, and then I'll get into the details of it later on. Do you remember Nazi Germany? If you've been through history at all, the Gestapo was the secret police of Nazi Germany, and their main mission was to silence all opposing views to Adolf Hitler's regime. Hitler understood from the beginning that in order for his political agendas to be realized, he must silence all opposing views, which is exactly what he did. The Nazis' efforts to purge German society of any kind of dissent against Hitler and his agenda were implemented in stages. It began with the burning of quote-unquote un-German books, in his view, and this was followed by the Gestapo interrogations using such methods as they would nearly drown people, electric shock, beatings, burning the flesh, and mutilation. And then the final stage of extermination for any anti-Hitler ideology was indefinite confinement in a concentration camp and really even death. Well, Hitler demanded absolute control of the thought processes of the German people. Any person caught listening to a radio station other than Hitler's propaganda broadcasts were brought before the Gestapo for interrogation and possible incarceration. So with really looming over their head with the threat of the constant prosecution and imprisonment, German citizens really existed during that whole era from 1938 to about 1945, right in there, maybe a little before that, German citizens existed as repressed and subservient minions, which is exactly what Hitler wanted. He wanted to control their thought processes in order to control them. Well, so the Bible prophesies that really in the near future, the most powerful politician from Europe will take control of a world governing body and rule it with an iron fist. He is referred to in Scripture as the man of sin, the son of perdition, the beast, and the Antichrist. Well, just like the most notorious dictators that have preceded him, Hitler and others, he will seek to silence all opposition to his one world governing system. In order to do so, the government during that period will have to control all of the media outlets. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're seeing precursors to that system that will be set up, that the government will endeavor to control all of the media outlets. So let me explain how the Prop or Not, it's a website, the Prop or Not blacklist, and the Countering Disinformation, quote unquote, truth panel are both a threat to free speech. So really, let me give you an overview and then I'll get into the nitty-gritty details. In late November of last year, the Washington Post had published an article claiming that Russia had meddled in the presidential election by spreading fake news propaganda. The article relied in part on the research of Prop or Not, an anonymous research group which listed more than 200 websites that it believed contributed to the proclamation of Russian propaganda, websites around the world and here even in the United States. Prop or Not has removed some of the websites from its pro-Russian fake news propaganda list since the Washington Post article was published. Now, there are about 200 websites on the list, and a few of, I wanted to bring it before you today because you will recognize a few of these quote-unquote Russian propaganda websites. And so tell me if you recognize a few of these. The RonPaulInstitute.org, a very extremely reputable website, but these guys said, hey, this could be Russian, used by the Russians as propaganda to try to steer the election. The RonPaulInstitute.org. Also included in the list was the DrudgeReport.com, a very reliable news source. Many of you go there every day. It's the first news source that I go to every morning. The Drudge Report, Jerusalem Post, Israel National News. Well, the Drudge Report is on this list as a quote-unquote possible Russian propaganda website. So you see where we kind of go from the truth to possibly a little propaganda? And then, of course, included on the list was truthdig.com, InfoWars, Zero Hedge, and then finally, there was about 200, but you may recognize this next one. It's Endtime.com. Our website was listed in this list on a blacklist to possibly be a Russian propaganda website. Now, I don't remember Vladimir Putin calling Irvin Baxter, myself, and our team here to see if he could use our website for Russian propaganda. So, do you see the difference between propaganda and the truth? We only report on true things, things that we use current events to show how prophecies written in the Bible are coming to pass right now. Would we be used as the Russians for a propaganda website to try to steer the election? No, it's propaganda. It's not the truth. And so we were listed, Endtime.com, on the list as well. So you say, well, what in the world? What really happened? Well, as a result of that, on the Friday before Christmas, President Obama quietly signed the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA. Now, I'm giving you an overview. I'm going to get into the details here in a little bit. Just giving you an overview. President Obama signed the Friday before Christmas, he signed the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA. Here's the thing. Hidden deep within the act is the authorization of the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act. The bill seeks a whole government approach without the bureaucratic restrictions to counter foreign disinformation and manipulation. Well, Zero Hedge, which itself is listed by Proper Not as a Russian propaganda outlet, claims that the Countering Disinformation Act is a bill which further chips away at our press liberties here in the United States and which sets forth the stage for really future witch hunts and website shutdowns. Now remember, Endtime.com was included on the list. So purely as a result of an accusation that any one media outlet or site is considered as a source of disinformation or propaganda and is then shut down by the government. So there's a possibility as a result of this bill that anybody who is kind of a denier in any way, they're going to say, well, hold on a minute. These guys may be being used as a propaganda resource for another nation, and there's the possibility of a shutdown. That's why I wanted to bring it before you today, because many reputable websites, news sources that I go to, Irvin goes to, were listed in this, in the Proper Not list, the 200 websites. So the bill really establishes a Center for Information Analysis and Response. In essence, a quote-unquote truth panel, which, according to some people's truth, which will identify sources of disinformation and develop and disseminate fact-based narratives to counter effrontery propaganda. So basically, this legislation allows what the government calls pro-American, in their eyes, pro-American propaganda to infiltrate cable, online, mainstream news organizations wherever the government deems necessary. So it's the government's truth panel. There's a big difference there if you follow the news at all. And so to those who really, of us that follow, and you as well, to those that follow the prophecies of the Bible, this is nothing more than the ongoing establishment of a world governing system. All of these guys, it's a huge cabal. These guys are together working for a world governing system that will be ruled by the Antichrist in the near future. Obama quietly signed this bill, and it's called the Countering Disinformation and Propaganda Act into law. This comes from Zero Hedge. On December 23rd, with the U.S. population embracing the then upcoming holidays, remember this is December 23rd, and really oblivious of most news emerging from the administration, Obama quietly signed into law the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, which authorizes $611 billion for the military in 2017. You say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, let's continue on. While the passage of the NDAA and the funding of the U.S. military was hardly a surprise, that happens, that's normal. Well, the biggest news is what was buried deep inside the provisions of the Defense Authorization Act. Zero Hedge had reported in early June of last year a bill to implement the United States, that in the United States, their very own de facto, quote unquote, Ministry of Truth had been quietly introduced in Congress. As with any legislation attempting to dodge the public spotlight, the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act of 2016 marks a further curtailment of press freedom and another avenue to stultify or to mock avenues of accurate information. So introduced by Congressman Adam Kinzinger and Ted Lieu, H.R. 5181 seeks a whole government approach without the bureaucratic restrictions to counter foreign disinformation and manipulation, which they believe threatens the world's security and stability. Well, the bill sponsor, Senator Rob Portman, stated this: surprisingly, There is currently no single United States government agency or department that's charged with the national level development, integration, and synchronization of a whole of government strategies to counter foreign propaganda and disinformation. Well, you might know this already, but long before the fake news meme became a daily topic of extensive conversation on such discredited mainstream portals as CNN and Washington Post, H.R. 5181 would task the Secretary of State with coordinating the Secretary of Defense, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Broadcasting Board of Governors to establish a Center for Information Analysis and Response, which will pinpoint sources of disinformation, analyze data, and in true dystopic manner, develop and disseminate fact-based narratives to counter effrontery propaganda. So in essence, long before fake news became a major media topic, the U.S. government was already planning its legally backed crackdown on anything it would eventually label as fake news. They were planning this a long time before it ever got to the media. So now, fast forward to December 8th of last year, when the Countering Disinformation and Propaganda Act passed in the Senate, quietly inserted inside the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act and of the conference report. And now, following the recent December 23rd Obama signing of the NDAA, the Countering Disinformation Act and Propaganda Act is now law. The signing into law of a bill that further chips away at press liberties in the United States and which sets the stage for future witch hunts and website shutdowns purely as a result of an accusation that any one media outlet or site is considered as a source of disinformation and propaganda and is shut down by the government. So, with the likes of the Washington Post having already primed the general public to equate Russian propaganda, they ran an article with fake news despite admitting after the fact that their own report was essentially fake. While the U.S. media has indoctrinated the public to assume that any information which is really not in compliance with the official government narrative, which let's say climate change or something like that, which we come on here all the time and say, hey, climate change is a hoax. But the government, I should say that the current administration believes that it's totally not a hoax. So we would kind of be included in this. Or that dares to criticize the establishment. I have to say that we've done that a time or two, to say the least, is also considered fake news, and thus falls under the Russian propaganda umbrella. The scene is now set for the U.S. government to legally crack down on every media outlet that the government deems to be foreign propaganda. So just like that, the U.S. government's own, really, ministry of truth is officially born. You say, well, what news sources are they referring to? Well, let's get into specifics here. Well, let me give you an example of how propaganda can be used in 2017. This comes from the Washington Post. It's an article, and it says the Russian propaganda helped Russian propaganda that helped spread fake news during the election, experts say. This is an article from the Washington Post. Now, they do give an editor's note at the beginning, and it says now this is before the article started. They give an editor's note. The Washington Post on November 24th published a short story on the work of 4 sets of researchers who have examined what they say are Russian propaganda efforts to undermine American democracy and interests. One of them was Prop or Not. It's a group of that insists on public anonymity, which issued a report identifying more than 200 websites that, in its view, wittingly or really unwittingly published or echoed Russian propaganda. Now keep that in mind. A number of those sites have objected to being included on Prop or Not's list, and some of the sites, as well as others not on the list, have publicly challenged the group's methodology and conclusions. The Washington Post, which did not name any of the sites, does not itself vouch for the validity of Proper Not's findings regarding any individual media outlet, nor did the article purport to do so. Since the publication of the Washington Post story, Proper Not has removed some of the sites from its list. So it's very key that we understand really what's going on here. Early on in the year, they started talking about, hey, you understand that there were websites that were coming out against Hillary Clinton and saying, and some of the that side of the election, and there were websites that were coming out against Donald Trump. There were a plethora of them. So they were given here's what this candidate says, here's what this candidate says, what they're saying is wrong. And some people there were news sites, reputable news sites that were reporting, hey, this person believes in climate change. We feel that's wrong. Here's why. This person says it's a hoax. We feel that's wrong. Here's why. They're reputable news sources. Well, the news began to stir, and there were stories passing around that saying, oh, wait a minute. The Russians are hacking into this, and they're spreading propaganda. They're using news sources here in the United States, possibly, to try to manipulate the election. And so as a result of that, which that could have been the crisis that was dreamed up originally because they wanted this solution, but as a result of that, just prior to Christmas, President Obama signed into law a bill that states that if it is deemed that we feel that any nation is being, any website or a news organization here in the United States is being manipulated in our mind, what we feel, if they're being manipulated by any other government around the world, or that even if they're really not lining up to the government's idea of the true news, then we have the right to shut them down. And so you say, well, hold on a minute. What are the websites that the Washington Post was talking about? This Proper Not list. Who's on the list? Well, I tell you what I'm going to do. I don't really have enough time left in this. I want to really spend a pretty good amount of time on that list. So I'm going to wait till the next segment. And what I want to do, I know I've got about 4 or 5 minutes left here, but the list is very important because I'll just tell you, because I know some of y'all, the radio station lasts for the first 30 minutes, and then everybody that'll have to watch the next 30 minutes will have to go to our website, endtime.com, or we live stream it on our Facebook page, Endtime Ministries Facebook. And I do want to thank all of you all watching on the Facebook page. It's very cool to interact with you. Even if you email me after the show's over, drobbins@endtime.com. I've got tons of information on this topic today. But in the list, Endtime.com was listed as one of the Russian propaganda websites. There's a lot of them that you will recognize that are very credible websites, but Endtime.com was on there. And so I'm going to really get into that in great detail and some of the results of that and really where we're headed. Because if you look at this prophetically, we know that there is a world government that's being established. There's an establishment here in the United States that's an arm of that world government. They're all in cahoots together. It's a huge cabal, and they're working together to implement and to establish this world governing agenda in the earth today. That's what they're trying to establish. And so in order to do that, just like I talked about Hitler originally, he knew that to put forth his agenda and to get that agenda really to see it come to fruition, he had to control the thought processes of men. And so he started his propaganda machine. And he got on all the media, television, radio, whatever, magazines, books, and he said, okay, here's what we're doing. Here's Hitler's agenda. And even on the radio, anybody who listened to anything on the radio other than Hitler's propaganda radio stations, they were brought before the Gestapo. Well, that's kind of what's happening now. You say, well, hold on a minute. You're going way past really what's happening. No. Think about it. Some of the bill that was just signed just before Christmas, December 23rd, they're wanting to use that bill, and get this, it was put in a military appropriations bill. Where in the world does that fit with military appropriations? So it was slid in there, and then they signed the bill. They signed this huge, everybody's happy. They signed a $611 billion military appropriations bill. That's awesome. NDAA. But what wasn't broadcast is that included in the bill was the section on foreign governments and propaganda using U.S. websites and media outlets to promote their agendas and to somehow use their propaganda to wiggle their way in and manipulate an election, to control things, the government going on here in the United States, whatever. You see what's going on? They're really getting back to what we've seen before. It's deja vu, what Hitler was doing. You say, well, we're not there yet. The problem is, if we allow things like this to continue, we could get there really quickly. When it becomes the point where and think about free speech, the First Amendment. These websites should have freedom of speech, but they're saying if you do anything that's against the government, that's against the government, the ministry of truth that they've now set up, that they could come in and possibly shut your website down. Think about that. How does that compare to the freedom of speech? Well, at that point, there is none. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to continue on in the next segment.
From Here to Armageddon, a new exciting 8-lesson series to share with your friends and family. Order yours right away.
Answering many questions like, how far are we from the Battle of Armageddon? What will happen between now and then? Where are we on the timeline? Your questions answered in this exciting 8-lesson series, From Here to Armageddon.
Go to Endtime.com or call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-ENDTIME, 1-800-363-8463. Order yours right away.
Most people have dreamed of someday walking on the ground where Jesus walked over 2,000 years ago. You don't want to wait any longer. Make this the year for your life-changing experience. Judy and I would like to invite you to join us for our 2017 Spring End Time Prophecy Tour. This is a 14-day trip to Israel and Rome. Please join us to experience the greatest place on earth, the Promised Land, with an added bonus, Rome, Italy. Start making your plans right now and join us April 30th through May 13th of 2017. We're going to have a wonderful time.
Call now to reserve your place today at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archives button.
Well, welcome back, everybody. And I do thank you for joining me today. And it's really a very, very important topic because we're talking about propaganda versus the truth. And included in this list, I'm going to go over the list and some of the people that are on it. Reputable news sites, websites that give very reputable information and information that you can trust are included in this list. And I'm going to go over some of the list here in a minute. But what I wanted to do was to go down through some of the Washington Post article. So at the beginning of the article, the Washington Post gave a short thing, kind of, taken aback and saying, well, hey, we've posted this site, and we've posted this stuff about the prop or not, and the list that they gave, but even though we've already ran the article, we don't really know if some of the information in there was even true. And so they're kind of going back. We don't know really how reliable this prop or not site was. But the problem is that even though they ran this disclaimer, the information was already out there. And a lot of people had already went to the prop or not site and saw the list. So let's go down through some of the Washington Post article to let you know really what we're talking about. The Washington Post article stated this: the flood of fake news. Fake news is all over the place today. The flood of fake news that this election season got support from a sophisticated Russian propaganda campaign that created a spread misleading articles online with the goal of punishing Democrat Hillary Clinton, helping Republican Donald Trump, and undermining the faith in American democracy. This comes from independent researchers who tracked the operation. Now, that statement was made. Now, think about that. If you're the American public, I'm going to start checking to see who in the world is that. I want to know who those websites are. Well, it goes on to state that Russia's increasingly sophisticated propaganda machinery, including thousands of botnets, teams of paid human trolls, and networks of websites and social media accounts, echoed and amplified right-wing sites across the internet as they portrayed Clinton as a criminal hiding potentially fatal health problems and preparing to hand control of the nation to a shadowy cabal of global financiers. Now, if you think about it, I don't know if some of that, think about that statement right there. The effort also sought to heighten the appearance of international tensions and promote fear of looming hostiles with nuclear-armed Russia. The two teams of independent researchers found that the Russians exploited American-made. Now, I'm not saying this happened. I'm saying this is in the Washington Post article. This is what they're claiming. They exploited American-made technology platforms to attack U.S. democracy at a particularly vulnerable moment as an insurgent candidate harnessed a wide range of grievances to claim the White House. The sophistication of the Russian tactics may complicate efforts by Facebook and Google to crack down on fake news, as they have vowed to do after widespread complaints about the problem. Now, and again, I'm going down the Washington Post article. There is no way to know whether the Russian campaign proved decisive in electing Trump. That's a key statement right there. They're talking about all this propaganda, and right in the middle they say there is no way to prove that Russian propaganda was decisive in electing Trump. Then it says, but, and imagine reading this. You're going to think, well, hey, this is what's happening. Researchers portray it as part of a broadly effective strategy of sowing distrust in U.S. democracy and its leaders. So hold on a second. So what they're saying is that if one party in the presidential election, we know who was elected, obviously, but they're saying that there's news agencies out there that if one party said climate change is real, and some of these news sites said, well, actually, that's not true, that these websites were trying to manipulate the election. So if we were trying to report on the truth, they were saying possibly that we were being used by Russian propaganda methods to try to influence the election and get Trump elected. I can tell you right now, Endtime.com is on the list. That's why I'm doing this whole program. And Endtime.com basically reported on the issues. That's what we reported on. Climate change, globalization, all the different same-sex marriage. What do the candidates believe? That's what we want to know. That's how we need to vote. And so consequently, that's what we did. We were not a Russian propaganda website trying to steer the election, because no, that's not what we were doing. But yet the reason I'm doing that is because Endtime.com was included on the list, and I'll get there here in a second. The article from the Washington Post goes on to say that they want to essentially erode faith in the U.S. government or the U.S. and the government interests. And this was stated by Clint Watts, who was a fellow researcher at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. And this is what I want to get to, is this Prop or Not. Another group called Prop or Not, a nonpartisan collection of researchers with foreign policy, military, and technology backgrounds, plan to release its own findings Friday, or just before November 24th, showing the startling research and effectiveness of Russian propaganda campaigns. And then they're going to give a 200 website list, is what was on Prop or Not. The researchers used internet analytics tools to trace the origins of particular tweets and mapped the connections among social media accounts that consistently delivered synchronized messages. We didn't do that. I don't know what the rest. I can tell you the rest of the sites, most of them didn't do that either, because they're reputable websites. So it goes on to state, identifying website codes sometimes revealed common ownership. In other cases, exact phrases or sentences were echoed by sites and social media accounts in rapid succession, signaling membership in connected networks controlled by a single entity. So if we found an article that it denied climate change, and we put that on Endtime.com, and let's say Zero Hedge did that, and then the Drudge Report did that, and RonPaulInstitute.org did that. Because several websites might post that, then they would say, well, all those networks might be controlled by a single entity. And so the article goes on to state, Prop or Not's monitoring report, which was provided to the Washington Post in advance of its public release, identified more than 200 websites get this, as routine peddlers of Russian propaganda during the election season, with combined audiences of at least 15 million Americans. Russian propaganda, Endtime.com. My whole program today is propaganda versus the truth. I can tell you, we have nothing to do with Russian propaganda. This is, I don't know. I don't even know how to, this is crazy. On Facebook, Prop or Not estimates that stories planted or promoted by the disinformation campaign were viewed by more than 213 million times. Some players in this online echo chamber were knowingly part of the propaganda campaign. The researchers concluded, knowingly part of the Russian propaganda campaign. The way that this propaganda apparatus supported Trump was equivalent to some massive amount of media buy, said the executive director of Prop or Not, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to avoid being targeted by Russia's legions of skilled hackers. It was like, he stated, it was like Russia was running a super PAC for Trump's campaign. And it worked. So they're saying that if people reported on the truth, let's say climate change, for instance. Hillary Clinton believed that global warming, which led to climate change, was true. Trump said it's a hoax. Well, it is a hoax. And we ran articles on Endtime.com that said global warming, which is human-induced global warming, which leads to climate change, is a hoax. So these people are saying that somehow or another, because we reported on true news that was actually trying to show people, here's what each candidate stands for, and we want to teach the truth here no matter what, regardless of popular opinion or peer pressure or pressure from the government. We have freedom of speech, or we're supposed to have, and we want to teach the truth in everything we do. Believe me, if Irvin Baxter comes on this program or I come on the program, I have documented everything that I've said. And I know what we're saying is the truth. Irvin's been doing this for decades now. And we've got stacks of documentation. And so there's no way I'm going to get on here and say, well, hey, climate change is a hoax, not knowing what I'm talking about. But yet they're saying that because of what we've done in the election as giving both sides of each other's, what the candidates stood for, the issues, which is what we reported on, they're saying that it's possible that we could have been involved in Russian propaganda to try to steer the election. Well, let's talk about the list. It's found. The article was entitled, "Is it propaganda or not?" And the research company was propaganda or not. So the list, they stated an initial set of sites that reliably echo Russian propaganda. We have used a combination of manual and automated analysis, including analysis of content, timing, technical indicators, and other reporting in order to initially identify or red flag the following as Russian propaganda outlets. We then confirmed our initial assessment by applying whatever criteria we did not originally employ during the red flag process, and we reevaluate our findings as needed. They state, we would also like to be clear. We strongly believe the First Amendment rights to freedom of expression, freedom of the press, diverse and independent media are vital to the health of a free society. Nonprofit and commercial, alternative and mainstream, all are critical to our democracy. Then they state, after saying that freedom of the press is important, we are happy to remove any outlets whose operators understand how Putin's Russia is a brutal authoritarian kleptocracy that uses fake news as online propaganda and resolves to help do something about it. For example, any outlets that has used a lot of Russia Today or Sputnik news content but resolves to stop doing so is going to be removed from the list. So they say, we absolutely believe in the First Amendment and your right to freedom of speech. But if you use anything off of Russia Today or Sputnik News, which are Russian websites, if you use anything off of those websites or refer to them, we've got to keep you on this blacklist. Now, and then they say, if you agree not to do that, then we'll take you off of the list. Where did freedom of speech go? I don't know. I would be questioning whether we still have total freedom of speech in this country. And I'm telling you, it's a precursor to the time of the Antichrist.
If ever people need to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for Endtime magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will really impact your life. Endtime has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that Endtime magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctors' offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine did in my life. Call 1-800-363-8463. That's 1-800-ENDTIME and get your subscription today.
So you understand how important this program is to us here in just a second, because I'm going to tell you some of the Endtime or some of the websites that are on the list. The supposed possible Russian propaganda websites. This article states that there are 200 on the list that are, according to the research group, prop or not, that are Russian propaganda outlets. Now, many of you, because I've talked to many of you and I know the websites that you do research on, will recognize some of these And these are very reputable websites. I don't know. I think they're just trying to squelch freedom of speech here in the United States. But there was 200 of them. I'm going to give you 6. The first one, the RonPaulInstitute.org. Any of you know Ron Paul? The guy is straight up. You can trust what he says. And Ron Paul Institute, go to his website. Very accurate information. The guy wants to know the truth, and he's teaching the truth. He always has, in my opinion. He was a great guy. Of course, that's why they would never let him get close to the presidency. But RonPaulInstitute.org is one of the websites. The Drudge Report is one of the websites. The Drudge Report, very accurate information. The Drudge Report. But Matt Drudge kind of goes against some of what the government teaches sometimes. And so they don't like that. TruthDig.com, Infowars.com, Zero Hedge, very reputable website in my opinion, ZeroHedge.com. And the final one, Endtime.com. Endtime.com is in the list, this 200 list, where they say could be involved in Russian propaganda. Endtime.com. And so I question, to my knowledge, and I'm pretty involved here, we teach the truth. Everything's documented. I'm not involved in Russian propaganda at all. Everybody, most of you will know that what we teach is accurate here. And so consequently, I don't know how we could have got on a list like this other than the fact that they don't like what we teach, and they're going to try in the near future to squelch our freedom of speech. So, you say, well, did you guys try to manipulate the election? Let me tell you what happened during the election. During the election, Endtime.com stuck to the issues and reported on the topics, such as we reported on the propaganda that human emissions of CO2 cause global warming, which leads to climate change. That's propaganda. And it's a complete hoax. And that's what we reported. We want you to know the truth. Now you say, well, hold on a minute. Most of the scientific community, this, that, and the other, I'm not so sure that's true. Now, if they're pushing the global governing agenda, sure, they're going to say that it's absolutely happening. But I'm telling you, it's a hoax. It's easily proven. We also reported on the propaganda that the process of globalization leading us into a one-world government it was stated that it was a good thing. We stated that's a bad thing. We don't want to be a part of that because we understand the prophecies of the Bible. The Antichrist is going to be over that one-world government. We don't want to be in that. So we taught against that. One of the parties was for that, one was against that. I can't help that. We're just teaching the truth. We also reported on the propaganda that the position of pro-choice is somehow better than the position of pro-life. That's propaganda. Pro-life, obviously, is the best choice. We also reported on the propaganda that more gun control legislation is somehow better and will make America a safer place. That's propaganda. More gun control will not make America a safer place. Take a neighborhood of 500 people. Remove all their guns. Now, if you're a thief and you know nobody in that neighborhood's got a gun in their house, where are you going to make your next hit? I mean, let's face it. Let's think logically here. More gun control will not make America a safer place. Of course, we have the Second Amendment, which I hope stays in place. We also taught about the propaganda that allowing illegal immigration is somehow justified. It's not justified. Immigration is justified. Illegal immigration is not justified. I don't care if people come to this country. There was a time when my family, way back when, come to this country. But I think people ought to come legally, not illegally. We also taught on the propaganda that we need to strengthen the nationalized health care system, commonly referred to as Obamacare. That's propaganda. That's socialism. We don't want socialism here in America. We want to be free people to decide for ourselves. That we also taught about the propaganda that socialism or progressivism is better for America than capitalism. That's propaganda. And we taught about the truth. We don't want a socialistic nation. We want a capitalistic nation. We also taught about the propaganda that further cooperation with the United Nations and the international community is a good thing and not a bad thing. That's propaganda. One of the parties was for going into a world government. One of them, I believe up until this point, is against that. We'll see what happens over the next year or so. We also taught about the propaganda that same-sex marriage is okay in our society. That's propaganda. That's not okay in our society. We want a Christian society. Same-sex marriage is against the Bible. It was abomination unto God. And so we're not going to teach anything other than that. That's the truth. Now, you want to talk about fake news. Take the propaganda. Let me give you a for instance of fake news or propaganda. Take the propaganda of human emissions of CO2 causing global warming, which leads to climate change. That's easily proven as propaganda. It's not true. The climate has always changed. The climate will always change. And think about this. Let's talk about propaganda. Here's some websites and here's some articles. Without action on climate change, say goodbye to polar bears. That's from the Washington Post. Climate change, even though there are articles that are stating that the polar bear population is doing fine. But they're saying climate change, the polar bears are going away. It's propaganda. Climate change could trigger the collapse of the major ocean currents. Yahoo News. It's propaganda. How climate change transformed, you say, well, how do you know it's propaganda? Because human emissions, humans emitting CO2 causing the earth to warm, which causes climate change, is propaganda. How climate change transformed the earth in 2016, CBS News, propaganda. John Kerry stated that the climate drive is an urgent race against time, the MIT News, propaganda. This is all propaganda. Global warming, which leads to climate change, is a hoax. People are saying, well, hey, if we don't handle climate change, the earth is going to be destroyed. Sea levels are going to rise. It's going to take over half the United States, and we're going to have these unbelievable tornadoes and hurricanes and all this other stuff, and we won't be able to fix it. That's not true at all. Climate change, you know who controls climate change? God. He always has, and He always will. You say, well, how do you know that? Because I believe the Bible. You say climate change, global warming, climate change is in the Bible? You better believe it. Everything's in the Bible. Let's look at it. Genesis 8, chapter 15 through 22. Noah and them had been through the flood. They just come off the flood. And we pick it up right here in verse 15. And God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife and thy sons' wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl and of the cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful and multiply upon the earth. Verse 18, And Noah went forth, and his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth, after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings unto the Lord. Verse 21, And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of a man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. Then we come to Genesis chapter 8, verse 22. This is the key scripture. All I need is one verse in the Bible to combat all of the global warming, climate change, people that are proponents of that. All I need is one verse, and I will stand upon that from here on. Genesis 8, verse 22 states, And this was a promise to Noah from God. While the earth remaineth, as long as the earth is here, and we know how that's going to be and end up from the prophecies of the Bible. As long as the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. God told Noah way back early on in the human existence, just after the flood, that all of these seasons, day and night, hot and cold, summer and winter, would always be here as long as the earth was here. It's not going to fail. And so humans emitting CO2, causing the earth to warm to the point where we're going to destroy it, it's not happening. It's not happening. One verse in the Bible, that's all I need. Now, there's a lot of other proof. I can give you scientific proof. We could go down all them roads, and Irvin and myself have done that many times. But I'm telling you, climate change is propaganda by the international community to redistribute the wealth of the world from developed nations to underdeveloped nations. That's what it is. It's propaganda. And so consequently, when you see all these movies come out about climate change and global warming, it's propaganda. That's all it is. And those that are pushing that propaganda would love to shut down websites and media sources that say it's not true. Because remember, Hitler knew to get his agenda to come to fruition, he had to control the ideologies, the thought process of all of the people that were under him. So, let's talk about the future kingdom of the Antichrist. That's what we're looking at here, just in the very near future. Understanding the prophecy of a future world dictator, I want to focus on the ever-increasing battle between good and evil over freedom of expression. Why do I say it's a battle of good and evil? Because the Bible says that Satan will give the Antichrist and his one world government its power and influence. Revelation 13:2, and the dragon, or Satan, gave him his power, his seat, and his great authority. The Antichrist will seek to silence those who do not align with his political views. That is why those of us who understand the prophecy and adhere to the teachings of the Bible are alarmed when we see leaders or special interest groups, these different people here in America, trying to silence those who would take a stand for God and tell the truth in any form, climate change, whatever, in any form. These acts of silencing the opposition may seem small now, but if we continue, our freedom of expression will be stifled and evil will have its way in our society. God bless you, everyone, and stand for the truth.
End of the Age is a production of Endtime Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. Endtime Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.